Welcome to Crossing the Line, a special 12-part series of Kidsketch focusing on the interesting and culturally diverse San Diego-Tijuana region during the region's designation as the World Design Capital in 2024. Crossing the Line by Kidsketch introduces kids and adults to the benefits of sketching as a way of seeing, understanding, and appreciating the interesting world all around us. Crossing the Line welcomes a different guest sketcher each time, and today we welcome Architect Ricardo Rabines, founding partner of Safdie Rabines Architects in San Diego. We're going to learn about his sketching and how integral it is to his work. But before we talk to Ricardo, let's watch his firm's video about the award-winning San Elijo Lagoon Bridge.
It was just like, how the hell are you going to do this? And he says, it's going to work. I said, are you sure it's going to work? It's going to work. We didn't design just the hanging bridge. We designed and we shaped the entire bridge, meaning the highway. What we got an award is for the hanging pedestrian suspension bridge for the pedestrian component. That wouldn't work if we were not involved from the beginning.
Most bridges are long and narrow, but this thing's wider than it is long. It's casting a huge shadow, across that lagoon area. And how do you make it so it's not this dark, foreboding space? Carving out the arches, trying to get as much freeboard area as we could and allow for the bounced light on the lagoon to come through was kind of key to making that space a friendly space. Anytime you're working in the marine environment, it's a challenging and hostile environment. Everything that you're designing is exposed. You have to design structures to withstand storms, high water, but also understand the impact of the salt air. It has to be done thoughtfully and in a way that you're going to be able to be happy with seeing all the structure out there. We try to use materials that are very resilient, so you'll see a lot of things that seem kind of industrial. You'll see a lot of the steel elements are all galvanized, so it's very robust as far as a durability standpoint. You can see there's a little escutcheon plate that covers how the cable connects into the structure above. It allows for some flexibility, but it looks thought out.
What I was very surprised is when they came up with the solutions of the thickness of the cables. They were very thin. I thought we were going to have big, thicker cables. We just have to be sure that we follow the distance between the cable connection to the cable anchor has to be a certain amount. So we say if we can do a minimum, that will be perfect.
I think one of the things that makes these bridges successful is sort of that working out the details with the engineers. Teaming with T.Y. Lin, our bridge engineering partner, has been a really important relationship that we've had. We know how to work with each other and that sort of push-pull that happens.
Sometimes we have to push them and sometimes they push us. We want to do the best that we can to don't spend public money in a crazy way, but make the enhancements that we need on public spaces. Every single time that a bridge will cross water, we have to celebrate it with a bridge that is an arch to create the maximum opening, to bring water in and light in and no obstructions as possible. We imagine that the reflection of the water will create a special place. I wish you could be there all the time, seeing how the sun shapes and how people is moving, and it's so lively, and that becomes a room for everybody.
Hello, Ricardo, and welcome to Crossing the Line. That was a great video and a beautiful structure. Can you tell us a little bit about your sketching and how you use it in your work?
I sketch to communicate a thought, an idea that it comes when there is a challenge. There's a three-dimensional idea challenging, so I really need to express myself with a sketch. I right away get a piece of paper or pen, and if there is something to talk about or something to even write or even something to start thinking about design, I will start sketching something, and could just be a mixture of things. or could just be a three-dimensional form, or could just be an elevation sort of, or could just be in words. Sometimes the words will help me to capture a moment, and then I could convert it to something else. But I need my hands connected to my heart and my brain. So it has to be spontaneous. It has to feel, it has to be your first thoughts. My first thought is what I try to sketch. And it's very intuitive. How do I capture intuition? So the sketch for me is my first intuition.
We've heard you talk about the building in that video, but while we watch you sketch, can you tell us a little more about the design?
Well, you know that we do bridges. It's just one of those things that we've been doing for a long time. And we find it very exciting and interesting and challenging. It's like a huge sculpture that is it's on the site that we all pass and see. So anyhow, so on this project, we shape we want arches for sure. So the main structure under the lagoon is an arch structure. Now the arch structure has different columns, so there's many arches. And the arches are not equal because there's a different of angles. So it's sort of every single arch, just like a 5 different arches, they're all sort of connected, separated two at the same time. But when they ask us that we really need to add a pedestrian bridge there to connect the two sides, it became clear to us that it has to be under the bridge because the structure is there. And then we can use it and suspend it. And the sketch was very simple. It was just the shape of the existing arch, and then sort of imagine the width of the bridge, pedestrian bridge, that we have done something similar in other place. And then we just did a section sketch, and we felt that that was the right thing to do. And then we do an elevation by hand too. That was the beginning. So it was a clear thought, a clear idea of where do you cross, how do you hang it, and how is it going to be seen. And we put it close to the west elevation because we want the sunset. What is nice about this kind of views is it's about the light. See how the sunset gets into the water and there's reflections, and then it bounces from the ceiling, and it almost makes the under bridge, the pedestrian bridge, disappear. You don't even see it sometimes. It's so light. And that was the thought. So how do we come out with a bridge that it disappears? It doesn't block too much. It's sort of just it's like walking through water, if you can say that. That was a design intention, and that came out with the sketch. So I guess you can always go back to the sketch. You know, you have the first intuition, you develop it a little bit more, you sort of get convinced, you put structure, you put other things, and it gets into a different level. And then keeps growing. And then the users come, clients comes, and it keeps shaping, materials comes, colors comes, you add other elements to the sketch. And it's always nice to see the final render of the project or the final product and then compare it with the beginning of the sketch. That to me is so exciting to see, oh, that's what that's what we're trying to do. And then see how it kind of evolved and got to the other end. And then through that, you can see all this journey of different moments of circumstance that make you get where you are. And you can see still the resemble of the original idea. And that's so exciting.
Actually, it's exciting just hearing you talk about it all. Ricardo, thank you so much for sharing your process with us. We're going to try our hand at sketching the bridge now and hope you'll join along.
Absolutely.
This is the view we're going to sketch today, but before we start, let me do a little overlay, a demonstration. We're going to find the top of the bridge, its line. We're going to find the bottom of its bridge like that. Our horizon line is somewhere in the middle. And then we'll locate the two arches, the two supports, the arch in the middle, and the two arches up the side. We need to get the second column in. And then we can add the pedestrian bridge hanging there. Because what happens is all the other little columns back there are behind it. Ricardo had talked about the number of arches in there. And then we'll start figuring out how to make the reflection in the water. Because so much of what we're able to see is because of the reflection. There's those items in shade and shadow underneath the bridge. I think you get the idea. That's where we're going today. With the demonstration in mind, let me point out a couple of other things about our view of the bridge. We're not looking at it straight on, we're seeing it from the side, so we'll get a little bit of perspective. That's how we see things in 3 dimensions. So we're going to see the top rail like this and the bottom of those piers when they hit in the water, like 2 different angles. We'll do the top of the bridge, just make a line on your sheet like that. From this side, come down just a little. Let's find that bottom line. Make another line like this. Because we're working in pencil, you can go ahead and do that line. A lot of this we're going to erase when we're done. Now let's put in this pier, and I'm going to have you come in just a little on your sheet and make 2 little lines like that. Come over here and make 2 more lines like this, but make them a little wider apart. All right, so let's connect the tops of those. It's almost a straight line. Go ahead and just connect them with either with a straight line or one that's just slightly coming down like that. So that's the top of that column, that pier, and this is the top of that pier. Now there's an arch between them. So here's the interesting thing about the arch between them. Because we're at an angle, we're seeing that arch sort of distorted. If we were looking straight on, those would be our piers, and our arch would be like that. But our arch isn't like that. So what I want you to do, I'd like you to make an X in between the 2 columns. Can you make an X like that? And make a vertical line where the two lines cross. That's the center of your arch. And you see how this side is bigger than that side? So we've just found the center line of something that's been foreshortened, that's in perspective. So make a little tick mark, maybe about halfway up, and then curve it to that side, and curve it to that side. And there's our arch. Now, if you can, we want to make a line like that. There's that arch. There's that arch. We've got that laid out. And just so we don't spend all day sketching, let's give ourselves some limits. At that a little border. Okay, now let's erase. Because these lines are in our way. I'm going to erase those, the X. And this down here. And we got the face of the bridge. If you'd like, maybe give the face of your columns a little bit of shape, like we see there. and adjust your arches accordingly. To recap what we've done so far, we found the top, we found the line that was the bottom, we found a middle line that's the top of the columns, we found the center of that middle large arch, and then we added it, and then we add the other arches. Maybe while we're here, we could add another line just above the top of that railing. And what we're going to do when the time comes is come in and just give a bunch of little lines that show those openings, but not for right now. Let's just work on this to block out our bridge. The next thing we want to do is to get this portion floating in there. And we can do that now. And then after that, we will locate all these other columns because they really help to tell the story of what this bridge looks like. So you'll notice that that bridge is hanging there, and it's not a perfectly straight line, but let's sketch it for now as a straight line. It's just below. See where the pencil is. That's about how it's hanging down there. So if you could make a line. I'm starting right to left. And for now, like I said, we're going to make it sort of straight, but when the time comes, we'll give it a little dip because the bridge itself dips. So if you've got that blocked out, that's good. Okay, now let's tackle the row of columns in the back. So they're going back in perspective, but there's something interesting. Remember what Ricardo said is they don't exactly line up. They're a row of columns, but these two are here. Those are, if we were looking straight on, we'd see them zigzagging back and forth a little bit. So let's just use our eyes and see what we can do. Make a line from this front edge of that column. Just go back. Just go straight back to a point that's about halfway between our center and that next column. Let's make a point like that. And then I'd like you to make a little archy thing, okay? Let's use our eyes and try to locate these because some of the usual rules don't quite apply. I'd like you to find a point about halfway back from here to here. All right, in this front half, we're going to put these first 4 columns, and then the second half, we'll put the other 3. Make a vertical line at that point. And then we're going to make a line on either side of it. So we're seeing these columns. This is the front face towards the sunset, and this is the side face that's parallel to the water. Give it a little shadow. Now we want to find 2 more columns in here. So I'm going to just suggest put them in. We're going to come back in with ink and we're going to allow ourselves to get a little more loose. We're going to be a little loose with this sketch. So if you could just get your 4 columns in there, like that. Interesting because they work in pairs. See how these two, he talked about the arches underneath there. There's actually 4 wide arches. The first 2 columns have 1 arch over it. The second 2 columns have another arch. Third 2, another arch, and then the last 2, that last arch. And you can tell this because the sunlight is hitting the face of the 4 different arches. So if you take the first 2 and connect with an arch like that, and then the leading of that second one, arch like that. I'll go through this step again. There. So we have the first 4 columns. Now then, this next area has its 4 columns. And I'm just going to locate them. I'm just going to sketch them the way I did the first 4, sort of evenly spaced apart and getting a little smaller as they get farther back. And I probably should have pointed out that there's sort of a leading face to these. Leading face, and it's a little bit like a Y. Each of these is like a Y, and then it's got a side. So we're going to make all these Ys with a little side piece. And if you can, you want to try to get your columns a tiny bit smaller each time you go back. I don't think I've done a very good job making them smaller as they go back, because if you look at them, there's supposed to be a lot of space in between. I must have made them too wide, and I can't find my eraser. So I'm going to erase my Ys. They need to be smaller, much smaller. Okay, let's try this again. So, smaller Y. By smaller, I mean skinnier. They get skinny as they go back. And then the smallest Y of all. That's better. See how much space is showing up in between them? That's what we're supposed to have. I'm also reinforcing the arches underneath the bridge. It's not an easy sketch, you guys. All right. Through the railing, you can sort of see that at the far side of this lagoon. Let's just pretend it's up a little. All right, now we can add our pedestrian bridge, and we can focus on these columns or piers on the left. It has a skinny side. These go back. See how these we can definitely see a little more sort of perspective. And this column is right behind it. We're going to erase some of this bridge because 2 columns first. There we go. Remember that each pair column is tied together with an arch. Then we have the bridge. You can sort of see the bridge between them. And then beyond are the rest of these columns. Remember, they're sort of like Ys. All right. The front part here, we want to do some rock outcropping, like that. How about on this far side, just a whole series of little circular forms to suggest that's the riprap, that's the rocks that form sort of a bank. The edge of the lagoon. And we lose the rest of the lagoon behind the bridge. And you'll notice that that bridge, pedestrian bridge, it lands at that roadway, but we can't see what's happening. All we can see is that the pedestrian bridge stops. All right. The shadows then are going to become very critical in telling the story, because otherwise the bridge is just floating there. So we're going to be coming back in, and with a series of dotted lines, give the reflections of each of those piers. Just come straight down like that. There's going to be a same sort of thing here on the left-hand side. And then we're going to, when we get our pen out, it's going to be a series, we're going to be making a series of horizontal dashed lines to indicate what's happening in the shadow, in the reflection. And we're going to concentrate the lights and the darks. So where the light is hitting the bridge is going to be, see how the light is really hitting over here? That area is going to be, there'll be no lines. And same here, there's no lines except for some dark lines here right at the water base. And then that's what we'll get in and do. Let's start the inking. Before we do that though, let's see if we can't lighten up these lines a little. If you have a kneaded eraser, use it. I'm using just this white eraser just to lighten things up a little bit. We're going to totally erase these lines once we're done with the inking. I went ahead and got one of the pens that Ricardo likes to sketch with, Paper Mate Flare Medium. The point of it is similar to the pen that I normally use. And if I used a light hand, I'd get a similar line. Whatever pen you have, go ahead and use it. Give it a try. So let's start with this arch here in the middle. And just make our line. Tops of the capitals, so I'm just starting with the arches. And then the top of the bridge. I'm going to do the very top, and I'm going to try to do it with a little less pressure, nice and light. My pen might skip a little. The next line, I'm going to come down. I can make it a little more solid because that's that shadow line. I also see another bit of an arch here. I'll give a little hint of it. You can see it there. What's the next thing? I think these two piers out in front. There's the Y, and then its side goes back like that. And that next Y. Remember, we see the whole column. And those two are connected. I'm going to do these piers here on the left. Sort of a Y goes back. We see the side of it, just a very skinny sliver. And then the next pier, the Y and a skinny sliver behind it. Connect those two. You can adjust them if you want. I think mine's a little wacky. And then if you'd like to put the bridge in now, the pedestrian bridge, go ahead. If it's easier just to make it a straight line, you can. I'm skipping again, I'm trying to use a light pressure. We know that there's a solid portion on that railing, and then the top portion has some verticals, but for our sketch, it all sort of looks like one. See how they're like that? These vertical pieces on the railing. You can see it a little more clearly over here. I just don't think that we need that kind of detail in this sketch. We've got our bridge in. We've got the face that's fully lit by that setting sun. Now let's get some of the columns that are going back. And I'd like to do them in pairs. Let's add that arch. And now we'll do the next set of piers. You see the little Y and the side. It's like these are equal because of the view where we're seeing them from. We don't see as much as the side here, just the way the perspective works. So you got your Y, and the side is just about as fat. So we've got two more. And give them the arches. Connect them like that. And then we get the next pair of piers. And they're getting smaller. This is where you can, if your pencil lines worked, if you're happy the way you laid it out with pencil, good. Otherwise, now's a good time to adjust. If you needed to make them a little bigger, a little smaller, maybe a little thinner. There. And while we're over here, how about some of that riprap? I'm making sort of a curvy little line, which is where the riprap, those rocks, hit the water. And then just go ahead and add their irregular forms, stones, so you can make them as just irregular rectangular things, or it's easier to make them rounder. I like the, actually it's pretty easy making them just these rectangular things. And it looks like we weren't trying to make a bunch of little circles. And then we have that roadway above, making some sort of curved diagonal lines to indicate the slope. Okay. Now what should we do? How about just while we're here, do a series of those, just a series of dotted lines, which will be the reflection of the columns, the piers in the water. You can go pretty quickly. But we want to do the shadows and the reflections all at one time. So let's get everything else working out. So now I'm moving over to the left-hand side, and we can finish those piers that we started, the ones that go off behind the pedestrian bridge. You can see parts of them. All of this is pretty dark, so it's really hard to see what's going on over here. There's so much shadow. And just some indication of this rocky ledge. A couple other things before we start adding, just really giving it its the form, is up top. There's a series of these rectangles, and I'm going to put them in, but I'm just going to make a couple of lines. I mean, you can make the whole outline if you want to, but you can also just do the top and the side like that. And then remember that those rectangles are going to get smaller the farther back we go. If you'd like, you can see those light poles. These would be lines very light and maybe broken a little bit just so that you don't give it too much importance. If you want to, you could add a car up there. One of the photos had a bus in it. There's a hint of a person up here. And actually, isn't this interesting? You see can tell how high that railing is. The only thing sticking up is their heads. Like that. And there's some people back here too, if you wanted to add a few more people. Also, you could add a couple of diagonal lines like that. Those are those slender cables Ricardo talked about. Whoops, that one went long. But these need to be really light lines. Now let's start to think about the lines that we're going to put in the water to indicate the reflections. Let's get some sort of a line going down here in the water, a series of dots to tell us that was the top of the bridge. And if that top of the bridge is up like this, its reflection will be down like that. So let's just make a diagonal line like that. If the wind wasn't blowing so much, you'd probably see a straighter line. This whole dark shape is capturing the underside, the darkness, the underside of the bridge there. And so I'm making an upside down curve. We have that arch there, the reverse of the arch like that. All right, now let's start making some longer dash lines. They're horizontal, they're ripples. Now we're just going to start in general with some ripply lines where the darker reflections are. Not adding any ripply lines just yet where it's the lightest areas. So at the face of these front columns, avoid those areas for now. And so we're going to start creating sort of a positive negative space. We're defining the bridge by what's reflected in the water. And then, of course, going up to where it's a series of little horizontal lines down like that to show the reflection. And then every now and then make these little broken up horizontal lines going all the way across. So the water is ripply. There was probably a pretty good breeze blowing that day. But we still get the reflections. The other thing that we're going to do, we could have done it first. You can mix it up and go back and forth. And that is to get the shadows on the undersides of the bridge. There's two directions of lines I'd like you to add. A series of horizontal ones that get closer together as you get to the top of the arches between your pairs. So you're starting with that first pair, second pair. I started in the back. But see how the sunlight is catching the face of these arches? So it's the lines in between that we're adding the shadow to. And it gets darker near the top because that's farthest from the light. And then you can add some curved lines at the front edge like that, the front edge of each arch. And then I like to use either vertical or diagonal lines on the side faces. See the sides of these piers? The front Y of the pier is the side facing the light. So let's first start with the side shadows. But the interesting thing is you'll notice on the face of these piers, you're going to say, well, there's shadow on those. And that is because, so the very first pier, fully in the sun. The second pier has a shadow cast from the first one. So if you want to add a little bit, few diagonal lines, just to hint that there's a little bit of shadow as our piers go farther back in line, you can. And then I'm also going to put some sort of vertical lines in between those arches. You see where I did those? Just added a little shade, but I want the darkest shadows to be on the underside here. And then go to this side, and these are also dark, and we'll do the same thing. Horizontal lines, some occasional arches, and then you see how it's really dark back there. So we're just going to go ahead and let it be dark, and it causes that bridge the pedestrian bridge to really pop. And our reflections in the water are pretty dark back there too. And go ahead and make a little darker line where each of those piers hits the water. You see, it's almost like it's is the lagoon dirty? Is the lagoon getting the piers dirty? And then just keep adding more of the ripples. And notice that it's this dark zone here in the water where we're really getting that reflection of underneath. Just go ahead and add more darkness in that area. As the farther you go back, the lighter the touch of the pen should be, because everything back there is tinier. So if you wanted thicker lines in the water in the foreground, that would be the appropriate place to put them. And then this just takes time. This is where your mind can wander. And then just look around and see if there's any other areas that need attention. So back here, that little roadway back there, there's some areas that are just, I guess it's the underside, the supports of the bridge. So you can make those dark. And again, they make the pedestrian bridge pop. Now let's give a little definition to the railing on that hanging pedestrian bridge. I'm lightly holding my pen and making just some little flicks, just to give just a little hint of those vertical rails in there. At first, I didn't think we should make any marks on the pedestrian bridge because it's so small and far away, but I think it's a good idea as long as you're holding your pen lightly and making just careful little delicate flicks. For the foreground here, if you'd like to put some plants, these are kind of cool. They're like weeds or something, but they've also got flowers on them. So I'm just going to make a series of these like that. And then on a couple of them, some dots to indicate whatever those flowers are. And a couple other things. You can make some leaves if you wanted to, because this is in the foreground, so they're in focus and a little bigger. I'm actually making the shape of a leaf, and you can kind of see it, the two sides of a leaf. And then now just going back and adding more of the rippled water details just where you see it, something to bring your sketch to fill in your sketch. If you're using a pen that has sort of a point on it, like a felt pen, you can tip the pen up and try to get the skinniest point. And so just look at your sketch and see where some dark tonal values are beneficial and where light values are. So just, for lack of a better term, just make your sketch read. I'm going to take the eraser and clean things up a little bit. Make sure you've given your sketch, your ink, enough time to dry before you go in and try to erase. A kneaded eraser is a useful tool for this part, but if you don't have one, you can use something like I'm using, which is a large flat eraser, or the back of your pencil, whatever you have. Sometimes it helps to squint at your sketch and to see, do you need any more dark in certain areas? Is there anything that would benefit? I'm adding a little more shadow on the columns on the far left, just giving it, just helping it read a little bit more. I'm making a last few lines to indicate more ripples in the water, but what I want to do now is to get a blue colored pencil and hit the sky and some areas of the water where the blue sky is reflecting in the water. I've got my pencil. I'm gonna use those little rectangles that I kept open where there's not a car behind it. I'm gonna add some blue because you can see through them, all of them. Except for over on the far right where I think that's a land farm. There's like a hill or mountain beyond, but I was going to ignore that. And then you see the blue sky here. This would make a wonderful little watercolor sketch. I haven't spent much time doing clouds or things to indicate the sky. Of course, you can add any sky you want, but I think for now I'm going to just make some little shapes like look like M's, and that they're seagulls because we're close to the water. But I'm also realizing that that little area beyond the bridge, underneath the arch, it's not sky and it's not water, it's a landform. So let's grab our pen again and go back and do some indications that it is landform. We're just going to make some curved lines to hint at the slope of the hill. Now let's add some blue where the water is, and we'll concentrate our blue where we don't have any shadows, just in those, mostly in those areas where either we have just a few lines or no lines. And so that would be beyond the bridge, and then that area in the foreground. Putting in those areas between those columns, those little skinny areas there. Now I'm adding the blue in the foreground, the reflection of the sky on the water in the foreground area. You can make your blues as light or dark as you want. You can see I'm keeping my blues pretty light. Like that. And then if you wanted to, I mean, this would be a fine time if you had different blues. So maybe it's more of a green blue that's in the water. Like that. And more of a blue in the sky. So keeping my sky pretty uniform, but you can make light and dark areas, maybe sort of an atmospheric effect. And so I'm feeling the sketch is about done, so it's time to add the title. Where are we? This is the San Elijo Lagoon. You can say bridge or pedestrian bridge. Both of them are there. I'm going to say bridge. We're in San Diego. And add the date.